Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer, for that kind introduction. And thanks to Congressman Fortenberry for his leadership on wind and solar on the renewable front. It's great having him as a leader. Congressman Bacon as well is a wonderful leader of the wind industry, and we thank them for their support. I also just want to say it is wonderful to join you here today for a couple different reasons. I could use a little Nebraska nice these days. Washington, D.C. is a bit of a challenging environment, so it's wonderful to come spend a little bit of time with you and get a sense of the culture and the feel and the way business is done here in Nebraska. It's something the rest of the country could learn from, so it's great to be with you. This morning, what I'd like to cover, a few things. First, can't start, unfortunately, these days without talking a little bit about tax reform, and I do want to get you up to speed on where things are, because it is creating a lot of uncertainty for the wind industry. Want to share with you what the status is and what the work is of the wind industry to address the tax reform concerns, then talk about wind nationally, and then obviously here in Nebraska, and hopefully have plenty of time for questions. So let me jump in, if I can, on tax reform. This article recently talked about the cruel and unusual punishment of the House Ways and Means tax bill. And just to set the context so everybody knows, back at the end of 2015, so 2 years ago, there was a bipartisan deal. What a shocking concept. A bipartisan agreement to phase out the PTC. And this was an agreement, this was a proposal actually that the wind industry put forward and said, hey, as I might talk later, the costs of wind energy are coming down. You know, we can phase out that production tax credit. How many other industries have proposed a tax reforming of themselves? Zippo, nada. We are the only industry that came forward and say, hey, let's tax reform ourselves. Let's get off of the uncertainty of the PTC. So 2 years ago, bipartisan agreement to phase it out over 5 years. We actually are most of the way through this year, which is a, quote, 80% year. We've got 2018 and 2019, then the PTC is done. Because of the clarity, the certainty, the multi-year trajectory of that agreement, the last 2 years have been great. And we'll talk in a little bit about the momentum you have here in Nebraska, which kind of epitomizes, if not leads, the momentum of the wind industry in the country. But over the last 2 years nationally, $50 billion of private investments have been committed. We've hired tens of thousands of employees because of that policy. And unfortunately, the House Ways and Means bill that came out, whatever it was, week and a half ago, does two things. It lowers the value, it keeps the scheduled phase out, as Chairman Brady said. There is the 100%, 80, 60, 40 phase out of the PTC, but it lowers the actual value of the PTC by about a third, actually a little more than a third. It also changes the definitions of some of the details in the PTC so that it basically says, you know, the deals you did back in 2015 and the tax law, well, no, how you're going to be treated back on decisions you made 2 years ago will be different. So it's a retroactive tax increase. Because of that bill, even though it's not passed the House, it's not law, that has threatened that $50 billion that was of transactions the last 2 years. A number of CEOs in the wind industry are saying, hey, if that's possible, we may terminate, we may unwind the deals that we've done, we may need to lay off tens of thousands, up to potentially 60,000 employees if that bill were to become law. So we have, over the last week and a half, been expressing significant concern, but we're not the only ones. You look at the stock market. A number of the wind industry companies are down 10, 20% because of just that uncertainty. There's $6 billion worth of deals that we were expecting this fall, just at lead up to end of year, that are stalled, frozen. People don't know what to do because of that uncertainty. So significant concern with the House bill. Now, fortunately, the Senate bill that came out last Thursday, I think it was, maybe Friday, does not have that provision. The senators, led by Senator Grassley, Senator Thune, and others, have said, let's let current law, the current phase down, phase out of the PTC play out over the next 2 years. So the Senate bill honors that agreement, honors the agreement to invest in rural America. So we are confident at the end of the day that the Senate provisions will stand, that the PTC phase out will continue as projected, but between now and when that gets enacted, wind supporters throughout the country honestly need to speak up. Send messages, whether it's to Congressman Fortenberry, Congressman Bacon, your senators, to say, honor that agreement from 2 years ago. It's phasing out. Let it phase out. Let us play out these deals. I want to talk in a minute. It's because the wind industry is lowering our costs. We believe we can do well into the future without the PTC and stand on our own 2 feet, even though other sources of electricity still have their tax support and tax subsidy. So I guess one message I'm sharing is, please, we need your support. We need your help. Go to whether our site, powerofwind.org, or other sites, and just make sure your members of Congress know to support the wind industry. Do not change current law. So I wanted to share that data point with you. Now, enough about tax reform. Let's step back for a moment. It's quite important, but a bigger message is the momentum of the wind industry nationally and the leadership here in Nebraska. As David mentioned, you do have extraordinary wind potential here in the state, and perhaps more importantly, you've got tremendous momentum. You are on a roll, and my congratulations to all of you creating both the policy environment, the culture, the welcoming environment. The public power districts, Omaha, Nebraska, Lincoln Electric, are stepping forward for the benefit of consumers and looking at buying more wind energy. So first, you've got huge potential and you've got a lot of momentum. And I want to talk about all that, but let me set the stage now nationally, just so you know the bigger context. So here's where we are, about 85 gigawatts of wind throughout the United States. That's 42,000 turbines up there spinning. And I can share with you the number. It's 25 million homes are powered by wind energy. But what I find more memorable is just, so we have 42,000 turbines. Each turbine, a single turbine, powers 700 homes. So you look at that one turbine just sitting there spinning, 700 homes, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year on average, and we can talk about reliability and all that. But 700 homes powered by that one turbine. It doesn't produce any pollution. It doesn't use any water. It provides a lot of financial support to that landowner, normally a farmer and rancher. It provides a lot of tax base to the school districts, et cetera. Just that one turbine. So we've got 85,000 gigawatts currently throughout the country, about 100,000 jobs. I want to talk about how many in Nebraska. It's also fun, and I get the chance to speak to some young folks. The fastest growing profession in this country, last year, the wind turbine technician was the #1, the fastest growing profession. This, actually, that was 2016, 2017, it actually is #2. The solar technician, interestingly, is now the fastest growing profession, and the wind turbine technician is #2. I'm not terribly thrilled with being #2, but what the heck, it's still up there. It's still a great choice for young people looking for professions. Now, you look at this map, this shows obviously where a lot of the wind exists, in the central part of the country. But let me do an overlay. Those dots are manufacturing facilities. We've got 500 manufacturing facilities throughout the country, and guess what? We now have a 50-state industry. We are either manufacturing or producing wind electricity in every single state. As some of our members have told me, they've recalled, 10, 15 years ago, people would say, wind, it's such a niche industry, it's a bunch of tree huggers, it's a small thing, it's never going to get past 1% wind energy. I mean, it's impossible, and the grid operators can't handle it. We blew past 1% of electric generation in this country's wind industry. We blew past 2%, 3%. They said you never get to 5%. Well, we're at 6% now, and they say, oh God, can't do that. Well, we're on our way to 10%, and projections from Department of Energy say we'll be at 20% by 2030. So the wind industry, pardon the pun, keeps blowing past all these preordained limits, and I want to talk about some of them, but it's great seeing, again, the momentum of the industry nationally. Now, a few things about kind of some other dimensions. We have invested up until now about $115 billion in this industry, which means $115 billion, and 95% of that's in rural America. It's in communities that need that economic support. Over the next 3 years, if current tax law stays in place, i.e. the House Ways and Means version doesn't become law, another $85 billion is expected to be invested in communities throughout the country. Another dimension of this, veterans, especially after this past weekend, Veterans Weekend. We hire vets at 50% a faster rate than most industries. And why is that? Well, one, the jobs fit, but also vets are looking to industries that are going to be here for the long run and that have, not guaranteed, but close to guaranteed jobs into the future and have good, solid benefits. So a wind turbine technician, $50,000, $60,000 a year starting, plus benefits. A great job, and hence why we're pulling in a lot of vets. Let me share a quick story. It was wonderful because I was in Kevin McCarthy, Majority Leader's house. He's right under Paul Ryan, running the House of Representatives with a couple wind turbine technicians. And I was talking about the number of jobs and the jobs growth, and we're creating jobs in America. And this one technician, actually he's a manager of a wind farm in California, in Congressman McCarthy's district. And he corrected me. He was like, well, he goes, Tom, no, this isn't about a job. This is about a career. I am building a career in the wind industry. I'm working at this wind farm, and guess what? They've invested, whatever it was, $100 million in creating that wind farm. This isn't like the oil and gas industry he was explaining. It's not a boom, bust, boom, bust. This wind farm, they invested $200 million in. It's going to be here for the next 30 years. It's going to need to be maintained. So he explained to the congressman that he may be working there for the next 20, 30 years. He's building a home, he's building a family based on this industry, based on this, if you will, commitment. And it's extraordinary. These aren't jobs, these are careers. Men and women joining this industry are doing it because we're here to stay, and here to grow. A couple other factoids. It's wonderful seeing a picture like this, where roughly about 98% of the land of a wind farm, it's still being farmed or ranched. Those cattle could obviously care less. There's some turbine nearby, or the corn that's growing, irrelevant. So it's great seeing the men and women, the farmers and ranchers, where their property is still doing what they've done for centuries on it, and that they get the additional income. As others have said, it's a drought-resistant cash crop. Year after year, they're getting that support. And let me share this story of the Wilson family. I've gotten to know Richard Wilson, who's the gentleman with the white shirt. His father, a couple over, and his mother were, I think, either third or second generation Wilsons on their property just east of Colorado Springs, Colorado. And then his two sons on the outside. And Richard Wilson explained to me, and this was about a year ago, that they were selling off parcels of their ranch because they couldn't make ends meet. They were losing money on the ranch. And they didn't want to do that, but a wind developer approached them. They ended up building some wind turbines that you can see in the background on their farm. And he walked me through. He said, now we're going to stay here. And not only are we not selling off parcels, I'm going to be able to pass. In fact, he was in the process of passing the farm on to his two sons. So he could stay there, so they could stay there and keep living the life and the culture that they wanted to do. It was also interesting, and this you can probably relate to, he explained to me at least that they would make more money if he sold the entire ranch, put the money in the bank, and lived off of that interest. They would make more money than staying on the ranch, even with the wind turbines. But the lifestyle, the culture for them, their roots were here, and the wind farm enabled them to pursue their values, what they cared about. They cared about being on the land. So it wasn't about the money. In one way it was about the money, because the money allowed them to stay on the land, but it allowed them to continue their family's legacy of staying on the land. So yes, the wind industry is investing in communities, providing money, providing support, and that matters. But for at least the Wilson family, and I think many others, it allows them to continue leading the lives that they want to lead. But in addition to all of that development throughout the country, we also have built a manufacturing base here in the United States. 25,000 men and women are manufacturing these turbines. And Congressman Fortenberry alluded to energy independence. It is wonderful that we're able to build these components here, generate the electricity here. Yes, it is making this country more energy dominant, more energy independent, and the manufacturing is here. 25,000 men and women. We're expecting another 8,000 to be hired in manufacturing facilities throughout the country. One story that you may or may not have heard up in Newton, Iowa, a number of years ago, the Maytag facility, Maytag, maker of washing machines, et cetera, was moving their plant to Mexico. And Newton, Iowa was a town that was dependent upon Maytag. So their economy imploded. The jobs disappeared. The economy and the community tanked. Wind industry came along. This is in Iowa. Hello, a lot of wind, a lot of manufacturing potential for the wind industry. Trinity Towers came into town, started making towers, and actually that's where this photo is from, in Newton, Iowa, using that facility that used to make Maytag washing machines. And then TPI Composites, a company that makes the blades, moved into town as well. They're now having to recruit workers into Newton, Iowa from outside of the state, simply because there aren't enough folks in Newton and near Newton to meet the manufacturing needs of these new industries. So not only is wind industry providing low-cost, clean, reliable electricity, it's creating jobs, and it's creating jobs in rural America, where in many places it's so desperately needed. The trajectory, I think you have a sense of this, but the dark blue lines show cumulative wind energy, the 85 gigawatts that I mentioned earlier, and then the individuals show each year's additions. We just released our third quarter report. Fourth quarter will probably be bumping back up to the roughly 8-9 gigawatts this year, 7-8-9 gigawatts. Pipeline, and I want to talk both generically and in Nebraska, which I'll get to in a second. But we've got 85 gigawatts in this country. We have more under construction or in advanced stages of development than at any time in the history of this country. Point being that policy certainty that the phase out of the production tax credit has given us led to what we presumed, and that is clarity for industry to start investing, so we do have more in development and in advanced stages of development, the green and the yellow bars at the end. Now, why is that? Why do we have so much? Yes, it's that policy certainty, but it's also this cost curve. Over the last 7 years, the cost of wind energy has come down by 2/3. And you look at the Lazard reports or Bloomberg and the other reports, depending upon parts of the country, in some parts of the country we are the cheapest source of electricity. In other parts we're right around grid parity or approaching grid parity, hence why we believe we can thrive. If the costs keep coming down, we can thrive without the production tax credit, even though, again, other sources of electricity are out there with their different forms of tax support. But the cost for wind energy has kept coming down. We expect it to continue for these reasons. First, scale. We've got longer blades, and every time you add, say, another foot, if you remember from your high school geometry, pi r squared, if you add another foot, so to speak, it's the square, it's the circumference of the swept area of a blade. So the longer blades, the taller towers are reaching steadier, stronger winds. We also have improved software inside the turbines, better managing them, better O&M practices, better siting, et cetera. So a whole series of advancements by the industry are leading to a cost curve that is coming down. Now let me take a minute to talk about reliability and resilience. Secretary Perry came forward with a proposal 3-4 weeks ago. A proposal to FERC, a request to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that coal and nuclear power plants have, some of them, over 90 days of fuel supply. And it was his premise that, boy, they've got fuel supply on site, so that makes them more reliable and more resilient, and hence we need to give them additional subsidies, additional benefits. He did accurately say reliability and resilience of the grid are important. And we 100% agree. Reliability is important, resilience is important. He then went to the conclusion that, boy, fuel supply on site, we need to encourage that and we need to incentivize that. I strongly disagree with that, and let me share a couple of things. First of all, reliability. Here in SPP, Southern Power Pool, which Nebraska is part of, there are times at which over 50% of your electricity is provided by wind energy. And you're not having brownouts or blackouts. Over 50% of your electricity at times is wind energy. Iowa, it's approaching 40%, 24 hours a day. Down in Texas, over 50% at times. In Colorado, 65% of their electric needs at times are provided by wind energy. Now let's talk about resilience. A couple of examples. The polar vortex on the East Coast in 2014 got really, really cold. Wind kept powering through. 13,000 megawatts of coal went offline because they had different equipment freeze. Down in Texas, a cold snap in 2011, 3,000 megawatts of wind energy, of coal, went offline, and wind powered through, and the grid operator down in Texas said, thank God for wind energy because it enables us to keep the grid up. Hurricane Harvey, just a couple of months ago, wind kept powering through, and it was great to see. There were some turbines right next to the coast, and you have to shut down a turbine, depends on the model, but at 55 miles an hour of wind or higher, you have to shut it down. So there were some places where the wind was over 55 miles an hour, they shut down the turbines. But guess what? The geographic dispersion of wind farms throughout virtually every state, but down in Texas, there were a couple of wind farms that we had to shut down, but the wind farms that were in the 45 mile an hour area, they were ripping, producing electricity. So actually what was wonderful to see, that geographic dispersity of the wind farms were in fact a resilient capability that we brought. Meanwhile, 2 coal-fired power plants, their fuel flooded. They had that on-site fuel and it got flooded from Hurricane Harvey. Now, let me also be clear, we are strongly supportive of all the above. We do believe you do want a diversity of energy sources. You do need on the grid coal, nuclear, gas, solar, wind. But having wind come on the grid is adding to the reliability and resilience, not taking away from it. And that's just me, not me talking. The head of the National Electric Reliability Council, NERC, talked about the wind industry's capability to provide reliability services because of our new electronics. He's talked about our role in some of these weather events and how we're able to help the grid be resilient. So I say all that because I want to emphasize this point that wind is adding to the reliability of the grid, both here in Nebraska and throughout the country. Now, finally, let me get to Nebraska. And again, you're in an extraordinary place in this state. Over 1,300 megawatts of wind in the state you've brought on relatively recently. That's great. 3,000 to 4,000 men and women working in this industry. I think it's over $2 billion invested in this state. That is extraordinary. You're about, I think David said 10.5%. I thought it was closer to 13% of your electricity is now wind energy. But you're on your way towards 20%. You've got another 800 megawatts in either construction or advanced stages of development. And a lot of that momentum is from what I think is a combination of some good policies that you've enacted here in the state, the welcoming Nebraska nice culture, the great work of the public power districts in encouraging wind energy and buying wind energy, and I want to talk through that in a second. But first, to reiterate the potential, so you have over 1,000 megawatts. The potential is 800,000 megawatts. Now, you don't want turbines everywhere, and I'm not arguing for 800 times the current number of wind turbines out there. But you do have extraordinary potential here in Nebraska. You do have great wind. David mentioned, and he was accurate with your 45% capacity factor, a leader in this country. So you've got strong, steady wind, you've got a lot of land, and a great opportunity to invest in this state. Mentioned a couple of these factoids about 3,000 to 4,000 jobs, $2.4 billion invested, over $1 million in land lease payments to the farmers and ranchers throughout the country, and all of this without using any water. Now, Let's talk a little bit about who's buying wind energy. And I have alluded to this, but I want to give a shout out again to Omaha Public Power District. There, when you look at all of the public power districts throughout the country, Omaha is 5th. I think it's Nebraska is 8th on the list. Lincoln Electric is 6th on the list of the most amount of wind in public power districts. So congratulations, and I know a number of commitments have been made to putting more wind on the public power districts, which is hugely important. But it's not just the utilities that are buying wind energy. A lot of corporate America, you've got the example of Facebook coming to the state because renewable energy was available. And I think it was Rattlesnake Creek project, 200 megawatts that they are contracting with. But it's not just Facebook or Microsoft or other high-tech companies. You've got Procter & Gamble. Kimberly-Clark just did an announcement. Anheuser-Busch just did an announcement. They're all buying wind energy, and they're all picking states to put their, whether it's corporate headquarters or data centers, in if renewable energy is available. So corporate America is buying wind energy. The cities that I listed here in Nebraska are buying wind energy. So you can ignore me and just say, wow, public power districts are buying a lot of wind, corporate America is buying a lot of wind, cities, municipalities are buying a lot of wind. Why? Because it just makes good business sense. It's a low-cost electricity source, it's clean, and it's got a guaranteed price for the next 20, 30 years. Those contracts, the PPAs, go out 20, 30 years. And that's a great hedge against future potential increases, whether it's from gas or other sources that go up and down, sources of electricity. Wind is a great hedge against those future potential increases. There's work to be done. I mentioned earlier about tax reform. We've got to be sure that current law stays in effect. We also need to be sure of transmission. Transmission is important in this country for all sources of electricity. All sources of electricity benefit by a stronger, more comprehensive grid. Here are a couple different maps, more than you need, but giving you a sense of some of the transmission projects that are underway, either nationally or regionally or locally. But the point is, transmission strengthens the grid, makes it more secure that if there were some part of the grid that went down for whatever reason, were it terrorism or any other threat or some data problem, having a more robust, stronger grid makes it more stable. Point one, point two, more transmission enables lower cost electricity because it's like our highway system. Our highway system allows goods to flow, allows businesses that can provide the lowest cost, whatever, product, electricity, get that product to market, get to where it needs to go. So a stronger transmission grid allows the cheapest source of electricity, whether it's wind, solar, gas, whomever, to get those electrons on the grid and get them to load. So transmission does that, and yes, it helps wind, because in particular wind, obviously in the central wind belt within which Nebraska clearly lies, has a lot of wind potential. Load tends to be further dispersed. So Nebraska has great potential both to use it, but also to export wind energy to other states. But we've got to get more transmission to enable that to happen. This is a way too complex chart. The key point is it's from a study from SPP that shows that the benefits of additional transmission are at least 3 times greater than the cost of that transmission. The kind of generic numbers are often the cost of transmission can be 2 cents per kilowatt hour. The cost of wind electricity, just the electricity, is another 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So you have the production of wind energy, 2 cents, plus the transmission of it, another 2 cents gives you 4 cents per kilowatt hour. That's a heck of a good price for any source of electricity. So the point is, again, transmission is an important source of advancing wind energy in this country. With that, let me close again with a couple of thoughts. One, it is good to be here. We're going to do Q&A in a second. I look forward to that, hearing from you, your questions, and getting into a bit of a dialogue. Secondly, congratulations on the wonderful momentum you have built in the last couple of years here in Nebraska with the wind industry. It is great. It is obviously to the benefit of farmers and ranchers. It's to the benefit of your economy. And you've got even greater potential. You've got some good momentum. The wind industry is on a roll. We look forward to investing more with you in this state. But we've got some work to do to really get there. 1, keep doing what you're doing. 2, make sure that current law for the PTC phase down stays in effect, that we phase out the PTC as was planned, and that we get more transmission built. So again, thank you very much for listening for a few minutes, and I look forward to any Q&A. Do you want to MC?
So there are 2 mics, if there are any takers. Anybody? You're getting really lucky.
I know, exactly.
Do we have 1 taker? All right. If there are no takers, oh, wait.
Again, thank you for your presentation. Do organizations such as your own and similar organizations have the kind of resources that the oil companies are going to throw at lobbying so that we can have a similar voice in Washington?
That is a great question. The simple first answer is not even close. No, we don't. American Wind Energy Association is a trade association. We have about 1,000 members. They're very involved, and that's great. We are not like the nuclear industry or the coal industry that has been around for decades, that have much larger memberships and are able to raise much greater money to get their message out, to lobby Congress, to get involved with and through political action committees. So no, we don't. And I mean, we are the David, if you will, against Goliath. We're the change agent. We're the disruptor in the marketplace. And this isn't, in all candor at this moment, a plea for funding. I would say if you're not a member of the American Wind Energy Association, you should be. Please join. But I would say this is a plea for involvement, for engagement. We are, just a brief story, when the House Ways and Means bill came out, whatever that was, a week ago or so, we reached out to our powerofwind.org network. We got within 2 days 5,000 emails into Congress to say, whoa, this is a problem. So point being, get involved one way or another, as simple as go to powerofwind.org, enter your email list so you can get email updates from us about when to get involved. And you can then, yes, send your own email. You can call your member of Congress. You can call your senator. You can come lobby with us. Hopefully you'll join AWEA and support, but set the money aside. Get involved. You've got to get involved because that's the only way we're going to succeed over the long haul against sources of electricity that have much greater funding than we do. I'll also just say, fundamentally, I'm all about competition. At the end of the day, I'd love to see a level playing field, no tax support, and let's just compete. But to get to that place, we need your help and we need your involvement.
Yes.
Hello. My name is Ken Hart. I'm one of the state legislators that worked for 8 years to get to where we are now. And I noticed Ken Schiltz out at the desk out there was one of my colleagues. Both of us worked for a long time. But we're seeing in Nebraska now a well-organized and a well-funded groups of citizens who are coming forward, and in my opinion, it boils down mainly to NIMBY. Could you address that concern and what AWEA is doing? Because I think it threatens the future development, probably not only in Nebraska, but other places as well.
Happy to do that. Let me first, though, thank you and your colleagues for your work in the legislature. You have made a profound difference. I was reviewing earlier the 2016 legislation and other work that you've done that has enabled wind to fairly be advanced here in the state. And so it has made a big difference. So thank you. As you stated, it's my understanding here in Nebraska and throughout the country, there is a more organized pushback on the wind industry. It's from a couple of different sources. One, it is from our opponents, those that don't want more wind, whether it's the coal industry or others. And again, I'm good with all of the above, but the coal industry is seeing many coal-fired power plants being shut down and seeing wind come up. And so I get it, I understand it. They're pushing back on wind however they can. And so whether it's them or other sources are encouraging, funding, incentivizing local opposition. So we are concerned about that. I will, in full disclosure, also say, I think there have been some projects that we've done that haven't been well cited. There have been some decisions that we've made about how to design a wind farm. That wasn't really the best place to put it. Can't remember if it was John or David or the congressman talked about the red lights on the top of wind farms. I will just observe, we now have the technology approved by FAA to where there's a radar on a wind farm and the lights blink only if there's an airplane within a mile or whatever the distance is. Otherwise, they're not blinking. Now, I know there's a financial issue there. Those are not inexpensive. But the point being, the industry also needs to do a better job of making sure we're putting our wind farms where we're welcomed and we're designing them in a way and constructing them in a way that works best with the community. Now, a little bit back on your point, though, our opposition to some extent is being manufactured. You may have heard the term the grassroots and grass tops, men and women kind of getting involved. There's also what's referred to as astroturf, not grassroots, but astroturf, i.e. manufactured concerns. So there are very much people from out of states flying into communities and providing what I would strongly argue is false information about, wind turbines will give you headaches, or the flicker effect, or you're going to go crazy. That is manufactured stuff that has been debunked. So, all kinds of background. Key point is, we do need to work more thoughtfully and better with local communities, explaining the benefits of wind energy, explaining how we can work with the community, how the farmers and ranchers that have the wind turbines benefit, but the ones next door benefit by better, whether it's roads or schools or laptops being given to the kids, et cetera. So fundamentally, yes, we do have work to do at the community level. AWEA is leading a series of workshops, a series of best practices or conferences. We'll have different people develop or make presentations about, here's what we did. There was one community, God, this really worked. This other strategy, not so good. But we share a lot of that, so as an industry, we can get better and better with best practices. So the NIMBY issue is a real issue. We're seeing it throughout the country. I think we need to keep stepping up our game and working better with local communities. Long answer, sorry.
Darrell Hayek, Saline County Wind Association. You had the picture of the new grid, new transmission lines. Is there any talk about putting in bigger or more DC ties to move power back and forth across the country?
Yeah. There is a vision for that. One company that I know well, Clean Line Energy out of Houston, Texas, is looking at some long distance transmission lines, has one that's mostly approved. So we need more DC lines, and I know they're doing some. I know there's another one, I think it's DC, what is the line out of New Mexico heading towards Sun Via, something like that. In any case, there are a couple. I will just say, politically, building multi-state transmission lines is politically tough these days. So that's kind of why I had that whole transmission slide. We need, as an industry, to come together around a messaging effort to encourage more DC lines and to encourage just more smaller local upgrades. So it's some work we've got to do.
Great. I think with that, we can go ahead and go to the break. Thank you, Tradewin, for sponsoring this break, and we will adjourn at 10:30.
You're welcome.